Hello. Welcome again to Business Agility Live. This is Mike Leber, my colleague Manoy Cano with me. And our guest today, Barry O'Reilly. Barry, welcome.
Pleasure to be here. Great to spend time with you both today.
Great having you. So, Barry, it's really a pleasure talking to you because your topics, what you work on, is probably super up to date. It's probably very, very interesting for most companies, but also for individuals. I'll briefly invite you to maybe tell a little bit about yourself, but just to mention it, I think you published two great books. One you co-authored, I think, with a guy, Jess Humble, or maybe two. There was two more authors. I can't remember. Lean Enterprise, a great book, very well known, recognized in the industry. And a second one, yeah, exactly, that is it, Lean Enterprise. So still great to read. I can only recommend. And the second one, Unlearn. And I think Unlearn was his second one and recent one. And that brings us to the topic of today. Maybe you introduce yourself a little bit. And I'm just giving one hint here. You're talking from San Francisco. I think living in San Francisco might already tell a little bit about your profession.
Yeah. So I sort of have a bit of a portfolio career, probably I would describe. So I'm a business advisor, entrepreneur, and obviously author as well. I really focus on the domains of business model innovation, product development, culture transformation, and these are sort of the main areas I work with. Like lots of my customers that I consult with are generally executives in Fortune 500 companies or scaling startups here in San Francisco. I'm faculty at Singularity University, which is exponential technologies university. So founded by Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil, who Ray is the head of AI for Google. Peter Diamandis, people be familiar with, has written a lot of books, set up the X Prize. Like I sit on the boards of lots of different startups. Agile Craft is recently bought by Atlassian. It's now Jira Align, so people maybe be familiar with that. I was on the board of that startup. I work with Just Three Things, which is an OKR alignment platform, and Gamma Tech, which is a no-code rapid application tool. So they're just some of the businesses I work with. A lot of my work is primarily focused around product development, business model innovation, and using methods to help organizations to explore, how they innovate their business and grow leadership as a result of that. And as you said, I've been fortunate enough to work and write these fantastic books. Lean Enterprise, which I wrote with Jez Humble and Joanne Mulally. I think Jez Humble may be familiar to many of your technology followers. He wrote Continuous Delivery, which is sort of a seminal book really in software engineering about making thousands of deployments of software a day and how to do that. Joanne was the head of governance, risk, and compliance at ThoughtWorks, and I worked at ThoughtWorks for 5 years. I ran transformation and business innovation for them, and then on the back of that, I sort of spun up my own company in the last sort of 5 years and moved to San Francisco. And I wrote on Learn more recently, which was much more focused around, as I was recognizing people had to continually innovate products to stay relevant in their market. As I was working with these phenomenal leaders, I realized that, that they need to continually innovate their behavior and their mindset, and built a system that I applied to myself and now coach people how to sort of scale and adapt to changing circumstances. So I think at the moment, as we're in the middle of this COVID crisis, I think how people adapt to uncertainty, to changing circumstances is top of mind for a lot of people. That's what the book and the system is really about. And, great to share some of those stories and examples with you both here today.
Cool. Wonderful. And I think you already touched it a little bit. I mean, COVID is a very blunt way to tap into this topic, of course. But, we don't need to go that far. I mean, if we just look at a few industries out there, I think we can name any, just take automotive. I just read an article these days from one of the Audi top executives who basically admitted what we tried over the past 10 years didn't really bring us further. So they basically say we have about 5 to 10 years distance to companies like Tesla, because they couldn't get rid of their actual way of thinking, how they would produce a product. And I think that's everywhere. I mean, if you think about news and entertainment industries or retail and wholesale, I'm just mentioning Amazon here. And who knows what will happen, sorry for that, to real estate industries. That's a life problem here. Now, here's the point. What does this have in common with Unlearn? And I'm unmuting.
So, you know, like I work with a lot of leaders who are running these automotive organizations, right? And I think they recognize, you know, the way they even think about products is fundamentally different to the way people like Tesla and a lot of the, let's say, new entrants into the automotive industry even think about the product that they're building, right? Like a Tesla is like 8 modules. They see it just like Apple see a phone, right? It's just a piece of hardware. The magic is all in the software, the connectivity, the analytics that they're gathering in real time. You know, like on a yearly basis, Tesla is sending, you know, hundreds of thousands of updates to the car to make it more efficient. It can adapt the hardware just like your phone can be adapted and has new software deployed to it because you want to use it, makes it more efficient over time. You know, often this phone that Apple releases every year is not the most efficient version of the software. It gets better over time. And yet the paradigm for automotive industry is probably, you know, more familiar like a waterfall paradigm. You have a design, you execute the design, you push the product out into market, and that's it, right? It doesn't evolve. It only degrades. You know, so I think, you know, that's just a simple example about a complete paradigm shift, that if you can imagine the competencies you've built up, if you've worked for a company like Audi about what great product development looks like, your notions of it's much more about execution risk. Rather, you know, there's some market risk there, but there's no evolution that happens based on how the product performs in the market. So like really helping leaders unlearn a lot of those notions that have made them massively successful in the past, right? Audi, Volkswagen, Ford, these companies are absolutely massive. They're massively successful with what they do. But the paradigm has changed, the market has changed. And so a lot of those behaviors that would have made them successful in the past are now actually going to limit their success in the future. So helping people recognize that they actually need to unlearn and relearn new skills that can make them relevant in the market that they're operating is very much you know, what this system is about. And I think you know, for a lot of people, it causes frustration, it causes fear, it's uncertain. The initial reaction is to reject these sort of notions that you need to evolve, that you need to change. Because, you know, for a lot of these executives, all their feedback mechanisms are telling them their things are working, right? They've been promoted through the companies. You know, even Audi, you know, they're still growing as a business. They're still selling cars. Their metrics are telling them their feedback mechanisms are telling them they're doing the right things, you know, and yet they don't recognize that innovation happens often on an exponential curve. Leaders think the things that made them successful in the past will be the things that make them successful in the future. And I think this is one of the notions about, you know, what I'm trying to teach people is not that this current moment is incorrect, that they need to build this muscle to recognize when they're in situations where their existing behavior is not working and then need to adapt. They need to build this muscle to continually adapt to changing circumstances, because, you know, now it might be an example like a diesel car versus an electric car, but, you know, there'll be more changes, you know, about how society moves around, you know, like even at the moment with COVID, like this, no one could have anticipated we would be in this moment, and it would affect that it might have on transportation overall. Who wants to be on public transport? Who wants to be on private transport? Who wants to only, you know, like all of these things you just can't anticipate. So rather than just optimizing for the domain of just diesel versus electric, I'm trying to get people to think about build a muscle to adapt to any changing circumstances, because that's a perennial skill. And I think, there's lots of examples in the book, obviously, from working with people at NASA to Hilton to Vanguard to NASA to Capital One to AWS. So lots of different companies that I've been working with and helping their leadership sort of adapt to these changing circumstances.
That sounds super interesting. I mean, taking COVID again, I think many organizations and also individuals got used to a different style of working. And it just as a simple example, it's not yet talking about different business models or anything. But if I just consider it, it's probably not really what you mean by unlearning, because that was just, reacting, like more or less being forced, and maybe even not feeling comfortable and going forth back. So there was probably no systematic approach of considering, thinking about, and then whatever follows then. So maybe you can give us a little bit of an idea, maybe an example or something. How would that, and you mentioned it as a system, how would that unlearn system work? What's the concept behind?
Yeah, so thank you. Unlearning is a system. The way I describe it is it's a process, like of letting go or reframing once useful mindsets and behaviors that were effective in the past, but now limit our success. So it's not forgetting, removing, or discarding knowledge. It's the conscious act of letting go of outdated information and making space for new information to come in to inform decision-making and action. And there's so many examples of this type of system in the world, right? You might think about a computer, right? A computer has RAM. So depending on the type of task that you're performing, certain memory is unloaded and new memory is loaded up to execute the specific task that you're trying to perform, right? You're not. Just like products have features, and we've got to continuously innovate features for your product to stay relevant in a market, humans have behaviors. So humans have to continuously innovate their behavior to adapt the markets that they're in. So this is not like a sort of one and done type system. It's actually a virtuous system. The more you recognize where your existing behavior or mindset is limiting, identify and diagnose that, and then start to define the actual true outcome that you're aiming for, then that sets you up. I call them unlearning statements, and I'll share some examples now. And that sets you up to sort of figure out, as you relearn, what are the sort of steps that you need to take. And invariably, as you relearn, it's about taking uncomfortable, somewhat unfamiliar or unknown steps. Because if your existing behavior was working, you wouldn't have those problems. They wouldn't be issues for you. So most often, you're going to have to relearn some new behavior that's not familiar or not comfortable to you to get the breakthroughs that you're looking for. And again, as I said, what I found is that this isn't sort of a one and done process. As you recognize how to diagnose where you may need to unlearn, get good at defining the outcomes you're aiming for, and then start taking small, thinking big, but starting small and taking uncomfortable steps to relearn new behaviors that could give you the breakthroughs that you need. It becomes a virtuous system that people can continuously adapt to changing circumstances. Yeah, and the way I would encourage you both, we can do it right here and now, is, the prompting questions I would say for anyone listening to the show or yourselves here is, so how do I know I need to unlearn, or what do I need to unlearn?
Right.
Yeah. So the thing I would get you to think about is, can you think of a situation where you're maybe not living up to the expectations that you have for yourself, or maybe you're not achieving the outcomes you're aiming for? Maybe you've tried everything that you can think of, and you're, not getting a breakthrough that you're looking for. Maybe there's a situation you're avoiding or struggling with, right? Like these are, so any examples pop into your mind? So not getting the expectations you're aiming for, and situation you're struggling with, tried everything you can think of, and situation you might even be avoiding altogether.
Yep. So, I mean, this brings up a very good point you brought up earlier about COVID-19, right? I mean, there's a lot of examples and a lot of learning happening already on that. But how do you think the governments who actually are, starting wherever, across the globe, it's happening. So, how do you think the governments actually can unlearn what they have learned so far, so that the application of this can be in the right direction, right? It seems to be like sometimes we are just fumbling, right? We're not really making that sane decision. It's just driven by some or certain emotions, and then based on that, certain actions take place. But then they take back some of those actions and track it back to something else, and some of them are actually maybe in the right direction. But then you also have to stop and think whether it is the right direction or it is the right guidance, right? I actually had a talk few days ago on um, bringing the emotional intelligence piece to authentic leadership, right? How they are sort of connected in certain ways. And if we are talking about emotional intelligence as well as being authentic, and authentic leadership is the need today as we actually move into more and more complex and VUCA style of world, right? So if you are talking about unlearning from that experience or bringing that unlearning piece into it, where do you think it can fit in for the governments or the authorities who are actually working to avoid this crisis?
Yeah, so I think it's like applying the system here, right? Like unlearning can happen at many levels, right? There's your own individual unlearning. There's yours as you practice it yourself and role model how you're trying to change and adapt. It becomes to your teams, how your team can unlearn together, right up to like massive systems like organizationals, or even bigger, as you described, governments, right? And the challenge, I think, especially when you have these massive entities, like the first sort of question is everybody aligned on what the outcome is we're trying to achieve here? Like what is our measure of success? What's the direction that will tell us that we have unlearned our approach to COVID? Right? So I would ask you that question. Like, could you give me examples? Can you imagine if you were a government, like what would be your sort of measures of success? What would be happening in sort of 1 to 2 years time if we had a outstanding approach to how we're dealing with COVID? What could you give me some examples of what you think would be happening? What behaviors would you see?
Well, I would say in certain ways how we are actually limiting the spread, right? That's one of the first foremost thing, and also keeping people safe. Like how we can keep them more safe. How can we keep running the economy so that people are not feeling the pinch as they move along, and how we can save. Again, part of the economy is how we can save jobs and make sure that the wheels are churning, right? Because
Right.
it's a big engine moving in all different directions, but at the same time there are different cogs in that wheel, and we need to make sure that each wheel and each cog is actually lubricated well and it actually is functioning. Nobody's getting jammed anywhere. And while we are doing this, we also you need to see what data are we collecting from different areas, right?
Great.
Yeah.
I think I can give you two examples if you really like to be precise, Barry, and you choose which one might fit. So the one is, government's currently trying to make people aware of these apps. So apps for tracing, because attaching to COVID, right? For tracing contacts, to say, hey, that would be great if everybody has this app. The apps, smartphones communicate to each other, and then you can immediately be warned should you ever have been in contact too long with somebody affected. A problem here, nobody wants this because they still feel, this is hurting and harming my privacy. I don't trust anyone here. I don't trust government. I don't trust those who created these apps. So that's one thing. And the other one, which we recognize in Europe currently, in probably many, but especially in Austrian areas, a lot of money is being promised to support now those who need money and finance. But unfortunately, the old systems are still there, so they couldn't make it through the administration and administrative processes. So I don't know what was announced, like 40 billion euros being paid out quickly, hardly went anywhere. So I see just a lot of frustration.
Yeah, right. So this is a great example as well, right? So when you're trying to unlearn at this huge sort of system level, right? Already, both of you have given me examples around like what would tell us we're being successful. Well, we have examples of people being safer. We have examples of economics changing. We have examples of the infection rate going down, right? So even there's just 3 aspirations you have shared. They're aspirations, right? They're not quantifiable yet.
Right.
So you've just said, so safety could matter to some people, economy could matter to some people, infection rate could matter to some people, right? So we could be misaligned on those 3 things. Now, how can we even start to quantify those things? So safety, what's an expression of an outcome that will tell you that we're safe? Right? Like, can we even align on that? Is that what does safety mean? It just feels abstract. Good intent, but it's super abstract. Keep the economy open. Again, good intent, super abstract. Right? Make it concrete. So what tells us that the economy is at a 2% growth rate in the next 3 months? That's specific, right? Now we're getting closer to actually defining what we believe success to be, even in just one of these type of slices. The infection rate, right? So what do we, again, good intent, but that's just abstract. So what would be a good infection rate? That it's going down at like 0.7% spread rate globally? But then is everyone going to be able to then start measuring that? So even if we start aligning on what we think the outcomes are, and we all agree that what's the most important one? And then we can get really specific on what that actual measure of success is. Right? Now we've even just got a hope of agreeing that we need to unlearn, and we've some sort of expression to say how we will know we are unlearning, that we are taking a better path, because we'll see the infection rate go down to 1.7 globally, or we'll see the global economy grow by 3% across the entire these are huge systems we're talking about here. So there's such opportunity for misalignment, misinterpretation. That's just starting with defining what success is. Now, as we start to relearn and take steps to achieve those outcomes, so is there one single way to make sure we have a 3% growth rate across the entire world from an economic perspective? Is there only one option to do that? Absolutely not. So people are going to take all sorts of they're going to start acting what they believe they think is the right way to do it. And yet they don't even have any of the telemetry in place to actually understand the action they're taking. Is it having any effect on the outcome that we're all actually trying to align behind?
Right.
So this is why you have chaos of activity at a global scale with this, just like when you're inside organizations trying to transform. You know, when I ask leaders like, oh, we're doing a digital transformation initiative, I'm like, great, well, what are the outcomes that will tell you that you've digitally transformed? They'll happier customers, more products. I'm like, super abstract, absolutely useless, right? Like, you've got to get specific about these things, and one of the case studies on Learn is actually going through this process with Capital One's leadership team, right? Where we got specific on sort of saying, well, if we're going to digitally transform or have greater business agility in our organization, what will tell us that we've done that, right? And coaching the leadership to say, well, actually what we want to see is a 20% increase in customer wallet spend with us. What we want to see is a 35% increase in new product innovation in the next 12 months. What we want to see is a 75% reduction in our operating costs, especially for technology infrastructure, in the next 3 months. Right? These are very, very crisp outcomes. And then when you're starting to communicate that at a leadership level, teams can start to correlate their effort to that. They're like, well, if we need to increase our customer wallet spend by 20% in the next 12 months, what do I need to do in the credit cards team to contribute towards that? What kind of initiative should we be running? And I think this is sort of what it's really about. And it's nice to see Jason Hobbs on the line. Jason, good. Jason obviously is a fantastic leader at American Airlines, doing some amazing work in there. Yeah. So these are sort of the kind of ways we got to start thinking about doing this work. And the chaos of activity, yeah, awesome, right? And so this is sort of where we're at. Right. And a lot of my work is, as Bridget has sort of alluded to here, it's actually highlighting the chaos inside organizations, like how unconnected companies are to the like up and down their business, and bringing that sort of discipline to it, showing them these methods about how they can apply them. and then starting to actually make real progress in the directions that they want.
Right.
So that's a great point. Thank you for your thoughts, Barry. That leads up to me to believe you mentioned something about the transformation. It is kind of a very fiascotitious word in organizations, but at the same time, what do leaders learn from it? Like, or unlearn from this?
Yeah, so my favorite example, and there's tons of them in the book, obviously, but Ryan Schneider, who's the CEO of Capital One card business, he again, phenomenal leader, really talented, really humble, really authentic, to your points earlier. And I'll give you a simple example of his authenticity. After a month of us working together, trying to get them to be more outcome focused. And if you ask anyone, are they outcome focused, results orientated? Everyone's like, yeah, of course I am, of course I am. But what we spent the first month working together, and we sat down to do a retrospective. And the first thing that he put up on the board was agility is hard. And most of his team sort of sat there and were sort of confused. And he was like, look, I thought we were working an outcome-based organization, and I realized that we're just output-based. All we do is we get in meetings, we tick off tasks, we count how many people have done our safe training, load of rubbish, counted how many people have been on training programs, or none of this counts towards anything. What we need to be measuring is, are we increasing to 20% of customer spend with us, and how are we tracking towards that? We need to be outcome focused. And this was a huge breakthrough, right? But he didn't just stop there with his leadership team. He went back to his desk and he sent an email to 50,000 people in the whole company, which said, hey folks, we're going on this sort of business agility initiative. What we've been trying to do this as a team, as a leadership team, to understand how we be more, have this more in the way we work. We've recognized that we're actually quite output focused. We need to become more output focused. This is tough. This is hard. It's a real new insight for me. Let's keep going on this initiative together. And that's 50,000 people he sent that email to, right? So you can imagine the agency that creates in organizations when you've got leadership role modeling unlearning in themselves, being authentic, showing up. That's what it's all about, right? And it's not about we need to transform innovation kickoff with leaders are really saying, look, you all need to transform. I'm just going to keep working the same way I've always worked. It's just a waste of time. And I think, that's the kind of characters that I want to work with and enjoy working with. And if you sort of just want a tick box transformation, well, just go hire a load of, people who will come in and do a 2-day training course and disappear. And actually, do they ever really measure the outcomes of their training? Are the teams delivering faster? Are these are questions that leaders need to ask. Yeah. Is if you are paying for an intervention, how do you know the intervention had an impact on the outcomes you're aiming for? Success is not 40 people sat in a training classroom for 2 days and went home. Success is that we're delivering faster, that we are getting better customer success metrics. Define those, do the training, and make sure that people follow up that they're actually achieving those outcomes. Because if they're not, they're just selling you, more activity and walking out the door. And I think that's sort of a thing to be really conscious of.
Right. So I think what you're talking about here, you're pointing to it, like saying it's mainly, first of all, about behavior and not about skill or knowledge, because you can have a lot of knowledge, but it won't change any behavior. But what is interesting, while you were talking, I thought about it's sort of a combination. It's the leaders and it's the culture. So what kind of organization do they currently have? And that's not super simplistic, because I'm talking about an organization that might be more than 10 people, might be 10,000, 100,000 and more.
Yeah.
And if I think about Amazon, right, they obviously have a leader or leadership, which is there, right? They are super ambitious on, for example, never become a bureaucracy. That's their biggest fear. But at the same time, they grew this from the very beginning. So they also have the culture. But what if I'm now in a bigger organization, like we mentioned, one of the automotive manufacturers, and maybe the senior leader at least, took this decision looking into the mirror and saying, hey, we have to unlearn here a lot of things and move into totally different directions, but there is still a different culture. So what's your experience here? Maybe give us a few ideas.
Yeah, well, the automotive industry, I think, has one of the best examples of a transformation and turnaround led by one specific leader, and that's Ford and Alan Mulally,
Right.
by a long way, right? So Alan Mulally was the CEO of Boeing. He took over Ford right in the middle of the financial crisis. And, you know, lots of his programs, I think, are absolutely amazing about how he role modeled the kind of culture he was looking for other leaders in the organization to sort of set the tone for, right? And a lot of his work was very simple, like methods from, you know, people who are familiar with lean will go and see, right? He would just go down to teams and ask them questions about what their challenges were, and simply thank them for sharing the information, ask how could he help, you know, what steps they were going to actually take to try and improve it, and if there's anything he could simply do to help remove those blockers. You know, and what's very interesting is when this most senior people start role modeling these, like, you know, Edgar Schein would say this is like a humble inquiry.
Right.
When he starts role modeling these sorts of questions to like surface the information that's really happening in the company, and let the people closest to the work make the decisions and take action and support when they need it, you know, suddenly all his leadership team start role modeling the same behavior, and you get this trickle effect happening throughout the company when you see the most senior people role modeling these behaviors, right? When you have leaders who are like telling people what to do, acting in command and control type ways, removing any agency from people, you know, what do you think that the manager below them is going to do? They're just going to do the same and the same and the same and the same. So, you know, I often say to leaders that you actually have a profound amount of agency. You have a profound amount that you can do by just modeling the behavior you're looking to see in others, in yourself. You know, like that's the most important step about why unlearning starts with yourself, right? Like, what are you going to do differently on the expectation of what you're going to ask others to do? Another great example is CIO from Volkswagen, right? And so many people would sort of, are joking, oh, it's easy to be a CIO, you know, to sit in meetings all day, you know, what. And so he was like, okay. And so what I'll do is I will let anyone else who wants to be the CIO in the organization for one day, right? And they had a competition that anyone in the company could be the CIO for a day. A 2-year graduate won it, didn't even own a suit, had to actually go out and buy like a shirt, you know, and acted as the CIO for an entire day, where the real CIO sat in the meetings and just observed what was happening. And, you know, and then at the end of this, you know, the grad came back and reported back to people about what it was like. And, you know, but they both learned a huge amount from that, right? So, you know, there's a lot to be said about leaders who really sort of role model this, you know. And you know, the thing that Amazon have done fantastically well is the way that they've systematized their culture. It's not an opaque thing, right? You go onto Amazon websites, you look for their 14 leadership principles, and they are defined about the behaviors they expect from people. So when they're faced with uncertainty, when they're faced with situations, their 14 leadership principles are the way they expect people to behave. Right. And that's where you get all these notions like disagree and commit, where you get these think bigger, right? Be frugal. All these principles that they've codified into the way the company operates, they're alive. If you're in meetings in AWS or Amazon, people talk about, well, how could we think bigger about this problem? How could we be more fruit? They use the words. And that's what allows you to scale to a company that's nearly 800,000 people now. And, you know, when I worked in ThoughtWorks previously, like people lived and breathed the values and the principles about what the organization was about. People challenged each other in meetings based on those values and principles. They were spoken. They're not just words up on a wall, you know. And I think when we talk about this sort of culture as an amorphous thing, you know, the high-performing, scaling, massive organizations define their values and their principles, and they live and breathe them every day. They use the words, they practice the behaviors. And then leaders role model the behaviors they're asking of other people to get there. And that's what makes them successful. And I think if you are not doing that, these are simple tests. I wrote a blog called, controversial values are better than okay, or like, made up values. And it's true. Like, you need to start recognizing what are some of those behaviors and values in your company. Do you see them manifest every day, and what outcomes they drive? Because if there's a misalignment between your values, your principles, and the organizational unit you're in the wrong context, and sometimes that means you got to go. And that's a good thing in my book, is recognizing that you don't have a collaboration fit. But if you just sort of pretend that it isn't there, or it's opaque, or it's not defined, you get chaos again. And people have misaligned expectations and what they should be doing and how they should be acting, and it just causes more chaos.
Right. So is unlearn, I mean, it's an interesting consideration. So for me, it sounds like, what Brigitte before actually commented here, where she said, maybe most people out there who are in the position, they're more managers than leaders. Well, probably we still need good management, right? Because it's a skill, but would that be the point, that we need way more leaders when it comes to learning new things in order to move beyond? And then would even come the question about rank, right? Which is said it must be probably somebody on the highest rank to be the role model. But what all about the others without a rank, right? Being also actually a leader for movement.
Yeah, well, my definition of our definition of an enterprise and lean enterprise is it's a complex adaptive system comprised of a common purpose. Right. And so everybody has agency in a system, in an organization. It's not that you have to wait for the CEO to start unlearning before anyone else unlearn. You can start with yourself, right? Like, if you're in a team and you call out some of the things you're working on. Like, I'm trying to improve how I make decisions, right? So I'm personally myself trying to improve how I make decisions. I use a decision diary. I carry it around with me, and just see if here it is. Right. So this is my decision diary. What I do, you'll see in here how I make decisions. I write down tons of different stuff in it. What was the information I had? What was missing? Why did I make that decision? What were the trade-offs? How did I decide if I was going to do that or not? What's my note to the future to myself about what I need to think about when I review this decision? When do I need to review it? Right? Like, I'm systematic about writing down, when I'm making decisions, what's the information I need? What do I have? What do I not have? How can I get better at making decisions if I'm not reflecting on how I'm making decisions? Right? And this is a question I'd ask loads of people out there. Like, how are you making decisions? Most people are going to be like, oh, I just think about it in my head and I take a choice, and I'm great. So how are you getting better at making decisions? They can't tell me, but by role modeling this type of stuff and showing this to people, suddenly they're like, wow, I actually don't have a system for making decisions. I'm just making stuff up, and I've no way of actually coming back to reflect on it, and so, I think little things like this, I just do that in my team. And next thing you know, there's like 25 people suddenly now thinking about how do they make decisions and how they could make them better. And now we're unlearning as a team about how we might make decisions. So you can start the fire. You don't have to wait for the CEO. And they might have more influence in the system, but they aren't the only influencer.
Good point. That actually makes me think, like, how everyone else actually makes decisions. I would love to see a template, though.
Yeah, it's on my blog. Just it's called "From Good to Great Decisions." There's a blog website about it.
Perfect. So as we are coming closer to the end of this, but we definitely would love to keep talking. I would love to see from you, given this, current scenario within the enterprises and also the organizations, that they're going through a lot of churn around the organizational agility or the organizational transformation sort of thing, right? Building different kind of canvases, Just the other day, I was looking at different canvases, and there's so many canvases available now in online. I mean, there are plenty of them. So what is a single message, or maybe a couple of messages, that you would like to give to the leaders and the organizations who actually are going through the journey or want to, get on with this journey of learning and unlearning experience?
Yeah, so look, there's sort of 5 characteristics I've recognized that are important if you're going to really try and unlearn. The first one is curiosity. And if I ask anyone, are they curious? Guess what 100% of people tell me?
Of course.
Oh, I'm curious, right? And then my simple example is this. What happens when you give somebody a task to do that is more junior than you, and then they start solving the task in a radically different way than you would solve it? What's your initial reaction? Well, most people laugh because they'll just say, yeah, they're doing it wrong. That's will be my initial reaction, right? Like that's what most people say.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a classic example of shutting ourselves down from being curious, from getting new information, right? So like you have to practice being curious. It's not easy. It's not a given. Ownership is the second one. So when you're not getting the results you're aiming for, what's your natural reaction? Do you blame the other team? Do you blame the weather that day? If you can't lose the 5 pounds, do you blame the chocolate bar, or do you look at yourself and go, right, it was actually I'm eating the chocolate bar, it's on me? If you can't own your results or your contribution or your ability to affect them, you're wasting your time. And then the other parts is about commitment, because you're going to have to do things that you're not good at. You have to commit to actually trying things that you're going to struggle with, and for a period of time. That's hard. And that means you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and doing things that are unnatural to you, that are outside your comfort zone, where you're going to struggle, where you're going to fail, where it's not going to feel great. And that's why I think this notion of creating safety to succeed is so important. I always say we got to think big about the aspiration or outcome that we're aiming for, but start small so we can sort of learn fast what works for us. And starting small means it's safe to fail. It means we've fast feedback loops. It means we can take these small steps to see, as we're learning fast to where we're trying to get to. So they would be my things for people to take away is, cultivate curiosity in yourself, and ownership of the results, commitment to try things that are going to be tough, which being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you do that by creating safety to succeed. So think big, start small, and you'll learn fast.
Cool. That's beautiful. And I think it already points us to the end of the show, because we're usually going for 45 minutes, but we could probably spend another 2 days here and learn from unlearn. So there was another pointer to your podcast. You've got a podcast which is super interesting, interviews out there. So those who want to continue connecting with you, there is the website for the book. There is the website on your blog posts and all your services. So Barry, it was great having you.
Yeah, great to catch.
What are you up for next? Just curious.
Because what am I doing next?
Yeah, I mean business-wise, not probably.
Right. All right. I think at the moment I'm continuing to sort of build out, bringing a lot more machine learning and analytics to my practices. So actually, as I'm working with companies, plugging into their data systems, so we can really show the outcomes of our work together in quantifiable, systematized terms. So I've got a startup in the works that's really focused around actually bringing some of that accountability to this work. So I'm maybe I'll come back and share a little bit of that with you when we're live. Yeah.
Awesome. All the best for this. Looking forward to having you again. And for now, all the best. Stay safe, everybody.
Right.
You've been watching, and
sunny California.
Take care, folks. Bye.
All right, take care.